Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben. This is Diego Sanchez. Randy Couture.
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Welcome to Submission Radio, episode 120. It's the 3rd of April. Dennis Gradov here with Kasper Rosalowski with a special UFC 210 preview for you guys. So good to be back. A lot of stuff been going on. Last week, unfortunately, no episode coming out. Cass, a lot of people disappointed with no Submission Radio last week.
I know. I was crying myself to sleep this entire week, sobbing on my teddy bear pillow. And we're back though, right? I'm excited. We're happy. We got a sexy show. Spicy Boys are back. It's a UFC 210 breakdown. But what happened to all the people that were hitting us up with a lot of kind messages? Why couldn't we do a show this past Wednesday?
Yeah, unfortunately, during that period, my girlfriend Ash wasn't feeling too well and, ended up in the hospital. All is well now, though, but yeah, unfortunately, it did impact on the show. Wasn't able to get a sexy lineup for you guys together and put the show together. Had to attend to her, so maybe a decent boyfriend for once, which is good to hear. But, apart from Ash, a few other things fell through as well, just in my personal life during that time. A fun trip away, Ash not feeling well, and it was actually her birthday around that time too, so just had to sort of pull everything together and make sure everything was all right with her. But look, she is back on her feet, and we are back here with Submission Radio with the UFC 210 breakdown. A bit of a different time slot this time around, at the old time slot that we used to be at. And next week you guys can enjoy something similar, because after UFC 210 we'll be doing a very special breakdown post-fight for you as well. They'll be coming out on the weekend, but don't fear, the following week we'll be back on the usual Wednesday. That's of course because we'll be away doing the John Kavanagh show that we'll be giving away a couple of tickets for in this intro a little bit later.
That's exactly right. Very nostalgic, this classic old school time slot. But like you mentioned, that is exactly the reason why we are going to be flying up to Sydney this Friday to the Star Event Centre. John Kavanagh, I believe he's literally just touched down today. As we're recording, he's touched down into the country today. So if you see him around Sydney, give him a high five and maybe buy him a cheeky beer. But yeah, we'll be there. We'll be interviewing the man on stage. Very, very excited. It's going to be a lot of fun, of course, because we have to prepare for that. And a lot of things are going into it. We can't do a show this Wednesday. But I mean, as promised, we have been giving away free double passes every single episode, every single show, and this week is no different. So we got to announce the lucky winner. It is a man by the name of Ibrahim. Let me just see if I can get this right. Ibrahim Halimi, and he wins the sexy double pass to see John Kavanagh. I believe he's going to be seeing it in Melbourne, which is on April the 18th. But nevertheless, a lot of fun times here. I'm going to read out his review, the one that captured these free double passes. The title is Representing Australian MMA on a Global Scale, my favorite podcast of all time, 5 stars. And he writes, when I first began watching MMA years and years ago, I was always disappointed the Australians were never represented in the MMA media world. Then this podcast came to fruition a few years ago, and I was beyond ecstatic. I have literally not missed an episode since. I feel like I know Dennis and Kasper on a personal level. I swear you guys are so jovial and awesome. This might be corny, but your podcast literally got me through some of the toughest times. It would be my source of comfort, and for that I will always support and appreciate you guys. How's that, Dennis? Doesn't that bam, straight in the feels, just get you?
Oh, man, that's great. And I mean, when we set out to do the podcast, I mentioned many a time ourselves when we listen to podcasts, it helps you get through things. So, bang, you're going to be at the Melbourne show. We can't wait. And hopefully we'll get an opportunity to meet you and have a bit of a chat. I mean, what a great review. Very, very deserving man to check out the show in Melbourne. And for everybody out there who wants to check out the show themselves, tickets are still on sale. It's going to be Melbourne Tuesday, April 18th. That's, of course, at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. Jump on and get some tickets. And this Friday in Sydney, tickets are still available. Make sure to grab them. Me and Cass can't wait to see all the Sydney Submission Radio and John Kavanagh fans all in one place. Probably a few more John Kavanagh fans and Submission Radio fans. Or maybe we're both. Maybe they like us both. Who knows? But we can't wait to see your sexy faces over in Sydney this coming weekend.
Yeah, I think they'll throw roses for John. They'll throw bottles at us when we enter. But nevertheless,
and rotten fruit.
Yeah, it'll be like an old ECW show at the Hammerstein Ballroom. It'll be a lot of fun, and I expect the crowd to be rowdy and jovial. But I feel like we're just crapping on traditions all over the place. We're a few minutes into this episode. We haven't done the famous breakdown of what we're talking about and who we're talking about it with. John Morgan of MMA Junkies returned to the program. It's always great having John on Submission Radio, but he's going to be talking about UFC 210. This whole pretty much entire program is dedicated to previewing UFC 210. It's mainly around the co-main and the main events, which seem to be the juiciest. Then we've got Luke Thomas returning to the program. A lot to talk to him about there. He's going to help us break down the event further. He's got a very good analytical mind and an eye for the technical. And then our good friend Duane Finley, who we had on just recently, him and Hunter Homestead of FloCombat. We're going to be doing a bit more of a general discussion, still talking a little bit about UFC 210, but also things about Bellator, how they're shaping up, Bellator 180, and just some of the interesting things happening in the UFC, the WME IMG era, and a bunch of stuff. So it's a pretty stacked show.
That's right, guys. And before we jump into it, just to quickly remind you guys to follow us on Twitter at SubmissionAUS and jump on Facebook. Give us a like and shoot us a message. Let us know what you think of the show. We love having you guys sort of interact with us and message us and let us know what's going on. That's, of course, Facebook.com/Submission Radio AUS.
Yeah, a whole bunch of stuff, and we are very easily accessible and contactable. Feel free to shoot us a message. We've been getting some emails recently where people have been telling us their personal stories, and we've been enjoying chatting to them about that, going back and forth. It doesn't have to be about MMA. If you got something in your life you want to talk to us about, we're like an on-call. I was going to say Dr. Phil, but I don't know. I think we're a little bit better than Dr. Phil. Now, the order of the guests is John Morgan first, then we've got Duane Finley, and then we're going to be wrapping it up with Luke Thomas, and then a bit of a preview just between Dennis and I. Going to be doing a bit of rapping. But without further ado, I believe our first guest is on the line, and Dennis, you're about to introduce him.
All right, guys, joining us here on Submission Radio is a man known for bringing a bit of color to Octagon's side with his trademark blue polo. You know him from his amazing work on MMA Junkie and his podcast, The MMA Roadshow. John Morgan, welcome back to Submission Radio. It's good to have you, man.
Gentlemen, always a pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
Always a lot of fun when you come on, John. And I guess the congratulations is in order for a Las Vegas man like yourself, with the Raiders officially announcing their move to Vegas. Give us the reaction. How does it feel to have an NFL team on the way?
It's crazy, man. I'll tell you what, it is kind of wild. I've been living in Vegas for almost a decade now, and we didn't have any professional sports teams, and now we've got a hockey team, and which was cool, of course, but the NFL is obviously the biggest sport in the state, so it's pretty awesome. I mean, I'm born and raised in Dallas, so I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. MMA has taken over my life, so I'm not going to pretend like I get to watch that much football to begin with. But it is kind of weird getting somebody else's team. Like, as cool as it is, I mean, we're going to have this awesome stadium. I don't know if you guys have seen the architectural renderings, but oh my God, this stadium that's going to be built is insane. And I'm pretty stoked about that, just having that facility here. But yeah, you kind of feel bad for like stealing somebody else's team. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And the big question going around the MMA and the NFL world is, does this mean we'll be seeing the blue polo in the front row of future NFL games in Vegas?
Well, hopefully I don't have to wear it. For anybody that doesn't know, I'll wear that blue polo shirt so that my son can find me when I'm gone and I'm on TV. If he's missing me, he can tune in and find me. But hopefully, if we're at any NFL games here in Vegas, my son will be right there next to me.
I thought it was so that Submission Radio could find you on the screen in case Submission Radio misses you, John.
Well, that too. I just tell people it's my son, so it doesn't sound quite so weird.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought you were going to say, hopefully my son will be right next to me wearing a blue polo beside me, but you went a different way there.
Got to start him out right.
Right. Well, also, last weekend was a rare UFC free weekend, so we're just curious. So for a man who's always covering the sport, tell us, what does John Morgan get up to on a rare week off?
Dude, I'm not going to lie, man. I sit around and go, what the hell? I got nothing to do. Like, it's weird, man. At first, it's kind of good. I mean, for those who don't know, actually, my wife and son have actually been gone in Mexico. My kid, he turns 5 in May, and he actually spent the last 7 months in Mexico learning Spanish and kind of hanging out with his family down there, connecting to that side of his heritage, basically. So last week was awesome because my family was back in town for the first time. So we spent a lot of time together and getting reacquainted and having some fun and hanging out around Vegas. But I tell you what, man, it's so funny. Like, I mean, obviously I get exhausted, man. That Brazil and London and back-to-back weeks, I mean, that was brutal. But I tell you what, just as soon as I think I'm ready for a week off, it happens, and I'm sitting around on Saturday going, I feel like I got something to do. Like, you know what I mean? You kind of miss it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's so much fun, but so much work at the same time. I mean, if you're not an MMA media member or someone that's on the road a lot, you don't really understand that kind of feeling. But you'll be back on that road for UFC 210 next weekend, and a lot of fans aren't very excited or happy with what the show kind of ended up like. What's your thoughts on the lineup for next weekend's pay-per-view?
To be honest, I like it. I mean, top to bottom, it might not be the deepest card, but there are some fights in there that I want to see. I mean, right off the top, the first prelim, Magomed Bibilatov with Janelle Laus, I think is a fantastic fight. Irina Aldana is a fun fight on the prelim. So, me, man, I'm hardcore. I pick up little fights that I want to see. But I know the casual fan is all about the star power, and there's no doubt about that. But, I don't see how you can't be fired up for these top two fights. I mean, Daniel Cormier and Anthony Johnson, yeah, maybe it's not, the John Jones in the mix or whatever, but I love this fight. I mean, the clash of styles that these two guys present and the way their first fight went down, I'm intrigued by it. I really am. I mean, Anthony Johnson, man, there's just something about that guy. I mean, his power is unbelievable, and he's just such an intimidating dude. And, I actually picked Anthony Johnson going into that first fight with Daniel Cormier, and knew that, of course, Daniel Cormier's wrestling and his cardio was going to be a huge strength, but the power of Anthony Johnson, I just thought it's going to be too much. And then, he comes out and floors him right away, and I'm like, yep, see, I told you. Look, I know what I'm talking about. And then, of course, Cormier shakes it off and comes back and dominates the rest of the way. And then, of course, you have that, that famous ending sequence there where Henry Hooft is saying, don't give up, don't give up. And now you got Anthony Johnson, who's had this incredible run to get back to the title fight. He's in there, and you got John Jones lurking on the horizon in July. So to be honest, I love this main event. I'm very, very intrigued by it. I'm still going back and forth on who I think. I rolled with Anthony Johnson the first time. I think I might do it again, but I love the main event, and I love Gegard Mousasi versus Chris Weidman. I think it's a huge fight at 185 pounds. To be honest with you, I'm kind of surprised at Chris Weidman. Maybe not surprised. I guess these top-level fighters think differently than I think the common person does. Me, as a common person on a 2-fight losing streak, facing top competition the way he has, I might try to slide down the scale a little bit. Don't give me number 5 in the world. Give me number 15 or number 20. Let me just get a win under my belt, some confidence back. And here he is facing Gegard Mousasi, and of course, Gegard, just that career record that he's got is so incredible. And to think that maybe he's closer than ever to a potential UFC title shot, and he's actually starting to speak his mind a little bit. So he's kind of the humble trash talker that is Gegard Mousasi. So, yeah, you know what, man? These top two fights especially, I'm very intrigued by.
I think you've solved the event in general very well, and there's definitely some quality scraps for the hardcore fans. But like you mentioned, the casual fans may look at it and say, look, there's not that much meat, there's not that much juice, and I want to sort of circle back to those fights a little bit in just a moment. Do you think it is sort of a case where fans will eventually accept that UFC cards will be, a little bit more modest in 2017 or early 2017, or do you think that last year's sort of raising expectations is going to be hard to erase?
No, I think you hit it on the head when you said early 2017. We know the problems that the UFC has right now. We know the fact that they're waiting on John Jones to come back. We know the fact that Conor McGregor may be out for the entire year from as far as an MMA competitor is going. Ronda Rousey, who knows? Brock Lesnar, it looks like that's done. I mean, we know the star power is down a little bit. So, yeah, there's definitely some early struggles right now. And to be honest with you, maybe that's one reason I am so keyed up about these top two fights. Because you're right, the rest of the pay-per-view, no offense to Cynthia Calvillo and Pro Gonzalez, but I was a little shocked to find that on the pay-per-view main card. It is a little bit thin past that in terms of pay-per-view offerings. But as far as your question goes, yeah, I do think, this first half of 2017 is going to be tough. I don't think it's what we're going to see going forward. I do know that internally, the UFC wants to have two title fights on every pay-per-view if they can, just for the simple fact that, A, it helps with sales. B, if they lose one, at least they still have one on there, and it doesn't look like a horrible pay-per-view lineup. So, I mean, I do think we're going to see better things. I just think the timing right now is a little bit weird, man. It's just right now they're struggling to put the best they can together, and we haven't had a lot of huge events the first part of 2017, and I think maybe that's one reason I am so keyed up about these top two fights, because I think they are big ones.
Let's talk about the prelim card. I mean, you're known for sort of interviewing a lot of the guys in the undercard, and people really get to know them through your interviews. So tell us, is there something that you're pumped up about under the main card that fans aren't really sort of looking at?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, those first two fights of the night are great to me. Bibilatov and Laza is two incredible flyweights. I think that's a really, really good matchup there. The women's matchup between Irene Aldana and Caitlin Chukagian could be a lot of fun there as far as just a stand-up scrap. Josh Emmett, love that kid, man. Still early in his UFC career. He's shown a lot of toughness against Desmond Green, so a big kind of clash in styles there. You got the return of Charles Rosa in there on the FS1 prelims. Kamaru Usman, that's a guy that I think is destined for something special in his career, man. Great competitor there. Sean Strickland is no slouch there as a competitor. So those are some of the names that stick out to me. You know, the return of Miles Jury. I mean, that's a guy that was riding high and then, kind of lost against top competition. He's going to try to prove himself against a scrappy dude like Mike De La Torre. So some good fights in the prelims. None of those big, sexy names that stand out to you are just like, wow, that's amazing. But I think, if you are a hardcore fan, there's some good stylistic clashes in there that are going to be impressive to see. And
I got to also mention Thiago Alves versus Patrick Cote. I think as far as scraps go, that seems like a pretty sexy one, even though the names aren't massive. How do you feel about Thiago Alves going back up to welterweight after the, not so successful venture down to lightweight? Are you happy to see this? And is part of you kind of going to be missing that early morning drama when you go to those early weigh-ins and it's become famous for it, where you really never know what happens and there's always crazy things going on there?
It is, man. Those early morning weigh-ins are nuts, man. It's I do think they're the right move. I've heard people say maybe they should get away with them. I don't think they should go away with them. I think they are here to stay, and I think for good reason. I think overall fighter safety, they're definitely for the best. But no, to be honest with you, I like the move to 170. Thiago Alves is not a real tall guy. I think he's listed at 5'9" or so, and he may be even a little shorter than that. I mean, he's not a huge guy, and I like that. I like the fact that he tried it. I mean, I really do like the fact that he at least gave it a go, because he had always said, "I think I can do it. I think I can do it." Well, cool. Go ahead and give it a shot. But at 33 years old, not a guy that grew up like, as in the American wrestling system where he's been used to cutting weight since he was like 6 years old or whatever. I mean, I think it's a lot to ask of a guy, and I think at 170, because the thing to me is, I mean, he's thick. He may not be tall, but he's always been very muscular and very thick, and I never knew if that 155 move was going to work or not. And so I kind of like the fact that he gave it a shot, realized, hey, this isn't my thing, and is going back to 170. So I do actually think it's the right move for him.
Let's talk about that middleweight fight that you mentioned before between Weidman and Mousasi. I mean, the division's a little bit all over the place, John. So what would you see for the winner of the fight next, and what's sort of more important in your mind, this fight or the Whittaker-Jacare fight that's coming up?
Oh, man, what a great question. Man, it's so funny. Middleweight, I mean, with the reintroduction of Georges St. Pierre and doing it at 185 pounds, I mean, the whole division is just screwed up, right? I mean, you don't know what's going on right now. And so it's a great question. I think if Mousasi wins, you got to kind of lean in his direction a little bit, man. He's been up there a while. His career record, again, incredible. The highlight clips that you can put together for him are amazing. I think you got to lean in his direction a little bit. I love the matchup with Whittaker and Jacare, man. I mean, Whittaker, golly, he just keeps making steps that I think, oh, now here's where he's going to slip up. I mean, hell, even just moving up to 185 pounds, I thought, what's this guy doing? He's never going to make it in that division. He's not big enough. And sure enough, look at what he keeps doing, silencing the doubters every time. If he comes in there and does something special against Jacare, boy, you gotta think about that. I think maybe what you might end up is the winners of those two fights facing off with each other, because you still got the GSP fight that you got to get in there at some point. Sounds like the UFC is still really angling to get it done in the summer. I mean, you guys said big fights need to happen, and International Fight Week, that they want GSP to fight. Sounds like he's trying to push it off till the fall. But then you got Yoel Romero waiting in the wings. So, to be honest with you, I don't think the winner of either one of those fights gets to say, hey, I'm next. I mean, there's just too much in line right now. But potentially you could see the winners of those two fights face off for a definite number one contender fight. And
I'm just wondering, obviously the matchups are what they are. We do have Whittaker-Jacare, we do have Mousasi Weidman, but a lot of people I think originally thought Whittaker was going to get Mousasi. Does any part of you think that maybe they should have been switched up, maybe do Weidman-Jacare, two much bigger names, and then get sort of Mousasi and Whittaker with two guys sort of coming up in the rankings?
Well, here's what I thought when that came out, because I remember hearing that talk right away. I think we were all kind of sitting in a press room, maybe even thinking about the same type of matchup. The thing is that stood out to me right away is that as much sense as that fight makes for Whittaker, and as much sense as I think as it makes stylistically, I think it'd be, entertainment-wise, it would be phenomenal, right? I mean, now you've kind of got two guys that you think about strikers going up against two guys that you think of as grapplers. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a more stylistic clash where I think Mousasi and Whittaker would have been a lot of fun, kind of bang it out on the feet a little bit. But the thing I didn't see is from Gegard Mousasi's perspective, I feel like he's had to take some fights along the way that he didn't think made sense. And I could just see him looking at Whittaker and saying, hey, no offense, bro. Appreciate what you've accomplished. You're a nice little talent. But, bro, I've got 41 wins to my name. You know what I mean? 41. Yeah. Like, I need somebody a little higher up the pecking order right now. And I don't mean that as any slight towards Robert Whittaker. I think the guy's incredibly talented, and I love the fact that he's got the balls to step in there with Jacare, because that's no easy matchup. So, yeah, you know what, man? To be honest with you, I think, switching the matchups the way you said from a fan's perspective would have made sense. From a rankings perspective, it would have made sense. I think Mousasi is the one guy that I just never thought that Whittaker matchup made sense from his point of view.
And I mean, you mentioned the middleweight division and how things are sort of stuck because it looks like GSP will be fighting Bisping. But how quickly do you think the UFC will create an interim belt so the top ranked fighters could keep going if GSP does win and is sort of looking for his next big fight?
Wait, are you calling for the creation of interim belts? You're the only person on earth asking for interim belts, my friend.
I'm against them, John, but I'm a realist, and when I go to a casino, I don't gamble very much because I know I'm going to lose. So my question is, how long do you think till they actually make one if GSP wins? Because, I mean, does he just give up the belt on the spot after he beats Bisping? Does he hold on to it so he can try and get those 3 belts while not really defending his middleweight belt? How quickly, because you have so many top-ranked contenders, how long do you wait if you're the UFC to create an interim title belt for that division? It seems like this division probably has the best case for an interim belt compared to a lot of the cases in the past.
Oh, look at the no support there, Michael Bisping, man. Just already said. Yeah, no, listen, I mean, I like what Michael Bisping did recently, coming out and saying, hey, listen, GSP, if you're not going to fight in the summer, I'll fight Yoel Romero. I think it's a little bit of a bluff. I don't think he wants to fight Yoel Romero. He's not scared. I mean, Michael Bisping has fought anybody and everybody his whole career, but I think even he would have to realistically say that's not a great matchup for him. And listen, if GSP does beat Michael Bisping, there's no way in hell GSP fights Yoel Romero, dude. The size difference between those two guys would just be insane. So yeah, I would not be surprised to see an interim title come into the mix. As you said, I'm definitely not for it, but it's just, oh God, nothing makes sense at 185 pounds right now. The whole thing works, and this is what's got to be so maddening. If you're sitting in the offices just down the road here in Las Vegas, if you're sitting in the Zuffa offices and you're like, yes, we got GSP back in the mix. This thing is all going to make sense now. Sorry, Yoel Romero. Apologize for this, but we're going to have to put you on the sidelines until the fall. But you're going to get your title shot. But in the meantime, we've got GSP Bisping in the summer, International Fight Week. It's going to be amazing. And then GSP says, nah, man, I'm not fighting an International Fight Week. I'm going to in the fall. It's like, Jesus Christ, you just screwed up everything, man. We had all the little chess pieces in place to make this go, and man, that's what the UFC is dealing with right now. It's just trying to get all the pieces lined up. Everybody's trying to get their share of the $4 billion, which, by the way, the UFC did not earn $4 billion. They spent $4 billion, WMEING to get the promotion. So it's confusing time. Yeah, I would not be surprised to see some type of combination interim title come on the line, some type of interim belt. As we just said, I think the winner of those two fights, the Whittaker-Jacare fight, the Weidman Mousasi fight, I think that they could fight, fight against each other as a number one contender fight. Maybe one of them could fight against Yoel Romero for an interim title, perhaps, if that's the direction they go. So yeah, it would not surprise me. It's kind of a weird spot right now because that GSP Bisping fight is a really nice fight. In terms of star power and in terms of, being able to sell pay-per-views, which was the ultimate goal for the business right now. But man, it really is screwing up the division in terms of how things move. And gosh, I mean, you've even heard, Gegard Mousasi speaking out saying, I don't get it. They're making fights that don't make any damn sense. And when Gegard is speaking out, you got problems.
Gegard's like the meter for those kinds of things. And you talk about the frustration in the Zuffa offices. I mean, what about the frustration here in the Submission Radio offices in Australia, where we only fly out a couple of times a year to cover, international events? We want to know already. What are we covering in July? Is it GSP? Is it Bisping? Or is it something completely different? So it's felt all around the world. Let's circle back to that main event that you spoke of before, John. Obviously, DC versus Rumble Johnson. And it is going to be a phenomenal fight. But one of the questions is, at 38 years old, if DC loses this fight, obviously just a hypothetical, how much longer do you think we have of him? How much longer does he hang around until he maybe does something else, like commentating or hosting full-time? Because it seems like it's something that he's sort of, slowly getting into more and more.
That's a great question. I talked to DC last week, and he said, "Listen, man, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about what I'm doing after my career." He's like, "Dude, you know how easy it is to roll into a television studio and be eating from the craft services over there. You know what I mean?" He's like, "It's awesome." He's like, but he still does love the competition. And he admits at this age, once he stops fighting, there's nothing that's going to be able to replace it. He stopped wrestling and he was able to pick up MMA, but at this point in his career, there's nothing else he could do. So here's the thing, is if he loses, I think you could still put him against Jon Jones and sell a bunch of pay-per-views. And I think that's still a big fight, even if there's no title on the line. And in a lot of ways, it might, if Anthony Johnson were to somehow win this fight, now I know Anthony wants to fight Jon Jones too, but in some ways, that might be the answer to everybody's questions. I mean, you want Jon to be in a big fight. Dana said he doesn't want to headline with him anymore. Now, we know over time that will change. Of course, Jon Jones will headline. But I don't blame him for what he's saying. I mean, if the UFC is going to try to put 2 title fights, on every pay-per-view, you could put him as the co-main. And if something, drastic happens, which, fingers crossed it doesn't, but if something did, at least you'd have something above it. I understand what he's saying about not wanting to headline. But if it was a non-title fight, if you had Daniel Cormier versus Jon Jones in a non-title fight as the co-main of an International Fight Week pay-per-view, oh my God, what a big fight that is. You know what I mean? And I think Cormier still wants that fight. I still think he wants a shot at redemption against Jon Jones and against his rival. And I think he knows that's a huge paycheck. And if he's walking out the door, wouldn't you like to walk out the door with a nice paycheck as well? So, if he wins, I wouldn't be surprised if he has one more fight. But, man, what an interesting time this is in his career. I mean, we were actually talking about this on the Road Show last week. I think this is probably Daniel Cormier's last year of fighting. I really do. I think win or lose with both of those fights, I think he's starting to get to the end of it. But, man, just think about it. I mean, what he's put together in his career, what a special career he's had. What he accomplished at heavyweight when he was fighting for Strikeforce, the fact that, likely could have been a heavyweight, champion in the UFC, but stepped aside for his boy Cain Velasquez, and then, was able to become a UFC title holder in the light heavyweight division. 18-1 in his career, the one loss to Jon Jones. But the way history will look back upon Daniel Cormier, man, how much does it hinge on these next 2 fights? Yeah. I mean, if he's able to put away Anthony Johnson next week and then come back in the summertime and beat Jon Jones, who, let's be honest, I mean, if you're going to beat Jon Jones, coming off a lengthy layoff like that, over a year, of course, not, only fighting once in 2016, only fighting once in 2015. I mean, that might be the best time to get Jon Jones, right? And if he's able to beat Anthony Johnson, beat Jon Jones, and walk out the door and say, I've had enough, I've got nothing left to prove, 20-1 in his career, walks off as a champion, becomes the first guy to legitimately beat Jon Jones. Jesus Christ, he's one of the all-time greats. Or, he succumbs to the power of Anthony Johnson, which anybody can do on any given night, maybe has the rematch with Jon Jones, and let's say it goes the same way and he loses that, then where does he stand? I mean, I think this is such an interesting year for Daniel Cormier and how history looks back upon Daniel Cormier.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it's crazy to think that we may be seeing the end of that, because it feels like just yesterday that he was facing Jeff Monson in Strikeforce and sort of talked about as this up-and-comer. I still feel like we haven't had enough of Daniel Cormier. Maybe that's partly because of injuries and he really hasn't sort of had as many fights as we would have wanted before, a guy like him with the incredible talent retires. But do you think that in some ways the UFC might want him to stick around and maybe might try and sweeten the deal for him? Because really, you look at the light heavyweight division these days and it's pretty thin. I mean, it's very top-heavy. And if you remove Daniel Cormier, you're essentially removing a massive, massive part of the division.
I think they definitely like to. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, especially right now. Like you said, 205 pounds is such a, never been the the deepest division to begin with. It's always been kind of the glory division, but never been the deepest. And now it seems like thinner than ever. But yeah, man, I think they definitely would love to see him around. I just don't know how much longer he wants to fight. You know, he's told me again. I mean, he said, listen, the money that I make on TV is fine. He's like, I could make a fine living. He's like, my family could be well taken care of just doing what I do on TV. You know what I mean? And not having to train every day, not having to, to put himself through the rigors of fighting. Again, it's all going to boil down to that competition. But, he is 38 years old right now and been putting his body through grueling physical competitions his entire life. And I think he's probably kind of reaching the end of it. And, I mean, as you said, it's not the deepest division. So, how far down the division does Daniel Cormier want to go? I mean, does another fight with Gustafsson excite him? I mean, does Jimmy Mano excite Daniel Cormier? Does that get him to leave the Fox studios and go to the gym? Does Misha Serkinov, excite him? I don't know. I don't know. And I think that's what it boils down to. It sounds to me like financially he's in a good spot, and what he's really trying to do is things that really, drive him and motivate him. And I don't know if names like that do. And that's no disrespect to those names, but when you've been to the mountaintop and you're kind of on the tail end and you're seeing a life for yourself, outside of competition where you can spend more time with your kids and not have to put your body through the difficult situations, it might look like a nice option. But yeah, from the UFC's perspective, I'm sure they'd love to have it, especially if he wins these two fights. Can you imagine, the stardom that would be lingering above Daniel Cormier's head if he's able to beat Rumble and John Jones in the course of the next 3 months, let's say?
And I'd wonder if, depending on what happens with Cain Velasquez, if we don't see him back in the heavyweight division, I'd wonder if DC would have one or two sort of big fights in heavyweight division. I'd have to go through to cutting that weight.
I was going to say, there you go. That's what's interesting right there. What does Cain have left? Because DC won't get in Cain's way. I mean, that's his brother. That's not just his training partner, his friend. That's his brother, and he won't get in Cain's way. But let's say Cain suddenly decides to call it quits. Now you're talking. Now he doesn't have to keep himself down at 205 anymore. Now there's a fresh set of matchups, a whole new, stock of top-level stars. That's where it gets a little bit intriguing to me.
Well, John, before we let you go, we really appreciate the time. It's a little bit of a tradition. Well, not a tradition, but we're turning it into a tradition by doing it right now, and that's asking your picks for the main card. So I hope you got your picks hat on because we're going to go through the main card real quick. Will Brooks versus Charles Oliveira. What do you see happening in this one?
I think Will Brooks is going to go to his wrestling on here. I like Will Brooks in here. I think he can stay out of problems with Charles Oliveira. I know, Charles Oliveira can present some problems in those positions, but I think Will Brooks is the right pick here. I think that Charles Oliveira is as talented and as fun as he is to watch sometimes. I think when he gets to the upper echelon, it's just a little bit of a notch above him. And I think Will Brooks is hungry, and I like Will here.
All right, give it to us when it comes to Thiago Alves and Patrick Cote. Some people are calling it the sexy fight. I believe that was me a few minutes ago. Who do you see winning in this one?
No, I do like this fight. I mean, right? I mean, this is two guys that have been around for how long have you been watching these two guys fight? You know what I mean? So I do like this fight a lot. I really do. I like Thiago Alves here. I do think Thiago at this point in his career is in a good position. I think the step down to 155 pounds was a mistake, and I think it definitely showed going against Jim Miller. I like the way if you go way back to the way he was fighting against Carlos Condit, before he ultimately got caught and finished. I thought he looked pretty decent in that matchup. So I'm actually going to go with the Pitbull here. I'm going with Thiago Alves.
Let's talk about the matchup. The ladies that got put onto the main card. Lots of people looking sort of forward to seeing potentially some new stars being created. Calvillo versus Gonzalez. What do you see happening here? Do you see Calvillo sort of keeping her streak going and building more fans next weekend?
I do. I think so. I think, she's somebody that has had some hype around her from people that have kind of talked to me about her coming up. And I think, I was kind of impressed by what I saw against Amanda Cooper. So, I'm going to stick with her and give her the win there.
Just quickly, Weidman versus Mousasi. A lot of people, I see on the internet, a lot of people thinking this is a really, really good win for Mousasi. Do you think they're underestimating Weidman? Who are you leaning towards?
Dude, I'm so drawn on this one, man. It's tough. I am leaning just towards Gegard Mousasi right now. I feel like he's the guy that's in the right form. But, dude, you go to Weidman's losses. It's real easy to say, well, the guy's on a 2-fight losing streak. Look at how he was fighting in those fights. It wasn't like he was being outclassed. It was literally. I was talking to him last week, and I was like, how do you justify that in your head? I mean, you were competitive in both these fights, and And he was like, dude, John, it literally came down to like one mistake I made in both those fights. And you're right, like one move where if he'd have just, zigged instead of zagged, he'd still be okay, or however you want to say it. But man, it's got to be tough for him. But I feel like Mousasi's got a little something special going right now. I really do. I feel like he's finally put it all together. A guy that's been fighting forever and always seemed to have the potential, but just seemed to come up short in certain circumstances. I think he gets it done. I'm leaning just slightly towards Gegard Mousasi in this fight, but man, I really love this fight.
And I know you mentioned it earlier on in the interview, but I want to make it official and put a stamp on it. DC and Johnson, maybe your heart's changed a little bit from when we first started talking to you, John. What do you see happening here?
Dude, my heart will change 20 minutes from now, man. This fight is so back and forth, especially when we've already seen it play out. We saw Cormier take Johnson's best shot and then battle back from it somehow. So, I think the smart play here, honestly, is probably Cormier. I think that's the way to go. But I'm going to lean towards Rumble, man. That power is just something special. I think he has looked like a completely different person since he lost that fight to Cormier. And I don't mean just in the cage. I mean outside of the cage as well. There's no pressure. The way he handles himself and carries himself, I think he's in such a good place mentally right now. And he has that tool, man, the power that he can finish anybody at any time. And, hey, listen, Cormier has been in the television studio a little bit lately. He's been doing things outside of fighting. He always credits Cain Velasquez for really being, the guy that drives him in camp. How much was Cain there? We know Cain's, not getting ready for a fight right now. So, how much was he able to help on a daily basis? I don't know. So, I feel like the question marks are more around Cormier, even though he is such a beast. So I'm going to lean ever so slightly in Rumble's favor, but by the time this airs, I may have changed my mind 7 different times.
Yeah, us too. So we don't blame you guys. You know exactly what to do. MMA Junkie and John Morgan will be at UFC 210 right there on the spot in just a matter of days. So subscribe. Follow him on Twitter at MMA Junkie John, and of course go to MMAJunkie.com, or you can listen to the MMA Roadshow, which is obviously going to be available afterwards as well, wrapping up everything. And that's available on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and all the best podcast apps. John, it's always a pleasure having you on the program. We thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure, fellas. Anytime.
This is Chael Sonnen, and you are listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys, our next guest is the senior editor from FloCombat. He's a teller of tales, a family man extraordinaire, and a friend of Submission Radio. We're so lucky to have him back on the program and talk shop when it comes to the crazy world of MMA. Duane Finley, welcome back to Submission Radio. How you going, man?
It's my pleasure to be on, man. Anytime you guys give me the call, I'm happy to jump on and rock and roll with you guys. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun every time you come on, and we're going to be talking about a bunch of things. We're going to start off with Bellator. We know that you were down there at Bellator 175 just this past weekend. Give us the goss, give us the scoop, and just, I guess, the vibe in general. What was your experience like? We know you were there live in the crowd and having a lot of fun there.
Yeah, it was a good vibe. There's a lot going on with Bellator right now. I mean, to see some, I've been on this scene for a long time, and I've been to a lot of the major UFC events, and, Bellator has kind of lacked that buzz for a while. But I will tell you, it is absolutely there right now, man. Like, especially this weekend, they had Ryan Bader, Lorenz Larkin, Matt Mitrione sitting there. And I remember looking over at those guys and being like, man, there's something going on here, And then, Fedor and Chael were there too. But then, it was just that vibe that something big's happening with them, to know that they have, this Rory McDonald, Paul Daly fight coming up. They have this, then they just announced this New York, these 2 New York shows, The way it's explained to me, Bellator 180 will be like what the UFC would do as prelims. Then Bellator NYC will be the pay-per-view card. So, I think that's big moves for them, man. And I think there's it's just getting a lot busier there at Bellator as they grow. And I think it's pretty neat to see, to witness firsthand.
For sure. I mean, you just mentioned the Bellator 180 card. What was your reaction when you found out Ryan Bader will now be taking on King Mo at the event?
Initially, I was a little shocked, to be honest. I think it makes perfect sense to do Ryan Bader versus Phil Davis for that title. But then, Scott Coker explained it to me that, Mo had a close fight with him. Why not bring Bader in, do a title eliminator fight, and then it's fair to both men. The winner's going to get the title shot. So, yeah, at first I was a little shocked because I thought it was a a no-brainer to do Bader versus Davis 2. But then once, the brilliant mind of Scott Coker explained it, it makes a little more sense to do it that way. So it's fair for all three parties.
It's interesting the way they did it also, where they announced it in the cage immediately after Mo's win. I'm wondering, with Bader and King Mo added to the New York event, how are you generally feeling about Bellator 180? I mean, most notably, there are 2 title fights and 2 really big-name fights in the main and the co-main event. Does Mo versus Bader sort of change your opinion on the card in any other way?
I would have figured that Bader and Mo would have been on that bigger card. I don't quite understand why, unless you're going to build out, knowing Bellator, unless they want to build up that Bellator 180 card to be something special. I thought that would have been the perfect 5th fight. But yeah, they obviously have a master plan that they're following, so it'll be interesting. And Coker said over the next 3 or 4 days, we're going to find out the rest of this Madison Square Garden thing. So I think there's going to be a few more big announcements.
I mean, it's great for fans that Bellator are stacking the deck with this pay-per-view, but do you think stacking the undercard will be a good return on investment? Because we saw last year with cards like UFC 200 and 205 that even though they were stacked, the undercards didn't help them to do better numbers than UFC 196 or 202, which sold based on a strong rivalry in the main event. Is there a concern that some of the great undercard Bellator 180 will get lost in the shuffle?
Yeah, I think it lacks that, to be honest with you, man. If you look at the pay-per-view, the Metreon Fedor thing, I don't know how much heat's there. Wanderlei Chael, I think, that's been brewing for a while. But Lalal and Bader are friends, I think they're cordial with each other. They certainly were on Friday night, and I don't know if that really builds in that heat department as you're kind of mentioning,
Now, I wanted to take a side detour, Duane, and see what you think about this one. Matt Hughes recently teased a return to active competition that, pointed pretty clearly at Royce Gracie as a potential return opponent. Now, if that were to happen, it seems like, it'd be in Bellator. What do you think about a fight like that and, what it would sort of do for the company, especially when it seems like, recently they're gaining not only attention and momentum, but, these recent signings have also helped them gain a lot more respect as, sort of a slightly more legitimate organization with legitimate top talent. Do you think this fight sets them back a bit to the Data 5000 days, or is it necessary to keep casual interest in the product and grow?
No, on the Matt Hughes thing, I don't think that makes any sense. I don't think there's any need for it. If it comes back, I think, like Vitor Belfort kind of joke, or, he's pushing this Legends thing. I think it's happening in Bellator to some extent, and I don't know how well it's happening. So I think that's passable. But I think Bellator needs to stay with this thing they're doing with signing, prime talent and younger talent coming up. I think that's making a lot of strides for them, but it's also a big payoff for their future, because those are the fights that are going to matter. The Aaron Picos, the James Gallaghers of the world. Those are the things that's going to be relevant in the next 5 or 6 years. That's the longer play, instead of playing off older names like they have in the past, like the Shamrocks and, whatnot. But, I think they should just get away from these kind of legend situations, just focus on the here and now. The Rory McDonald's of the world, Michael Chandler's, like those are some viable talents that people are going to want to see.
You mentioned Scott Coker. I know you've spoken to him a number of times. Do you think you see a day where Bellator does away with these sort of freak show and legend fights? And do you think they're just sort of doing it to make up for the fact that their roster isn't as elite as the UFC's, and now that it's sort of starting to catch up, they might stop? Or do you think it's such a bigger part of what Bellator and Scott Coker are sort of doing that they'll always kind of have them, even if it's a little bit less often?
I think there will be a day where we don't see the kind of, because I made a joke, I call it Big Top Bellator sometimes, because sometimes that's the way it feels. It feels circusy.
Yeah.
So I wish they would do away with those completely, but I think they're moving in that direction. I think this New York card is a good sign of it. They do have Chael versus Wanderlei at the top, but those guys still have a few good fights still left in them. That's cool, and they have great name recognition. But the point is to draw eyes on that younger talent that's coming up. And I think the problem that Bellator has had for years is kind of homegrown talent, like spinning homegrown success stories. I mean, Michael Chandler's one, Douglas Lima's another. And they're both champions right now. That's a good situation for them. And then they can keep growing that, but they have to bring over people that, fans recognize who they're fighting. Nothing against David Rickles or whatnot, but that tournament format was just kind of churning out the same talent. Now that Scott Coker and company's broken away from that, it's good things, man. It's really good things. And I think that there's a lot of positive stuff going on. I talked to Mike Hogan this weekend, who signs fighters for Bellator, and he was a happy man. There's big things coming. Scott Coker said this weekend too that they're going to be very aggressive, or continue to be very aggressive in the free agent market. I think that's fantastic, because I think there's going to be a lot of free agents, after WME's done cutting this thing up.
It is a fascinating time. I mean, yeah, you said it. And this feels a lot like Strikeforce 2.0. I mean, I know people have always said that when Coker took over Bellator, but now more than ever with the way the roster's shaping up, it does feel, I don't know, Strikeforce-y and more exciting. And Coker himself mentioned on the MMA Hour that the Reebok deal basically helped expedite Bellator's progress and speed things up for them in terms of free agent signings. But the thing is, the Bellator, they still aren't at a point where they can really compete with the UFC or affect the UFC's businesses in any way. And, you could argue that the free agents that left the UFC, they weren't exactly big money draws, save for, say, Chael Sonnen. What do you think would need to happen for Bellator to seriously become a threat, or at least competitive, with the UFC? And with, everybody being open about the Reebok deal and obviously WME IMG kind of affecting a lot of people jumping ship, how do you see the landscape in maybe the next year or so? What do you think will happen?
Yeah, I think that it's a perfect storm right now for Bellator to make a run, because if you look at it right now, Bellator is putting all their guns in a row. And if you look across the aisle at the UFC, Ronda's gone, John Jones is still suspended, and Connor's off trying to get a boxing fight. It's the perfect scenario right now for them to make ground. And if you look at this past week, if you watch, I know you guys are on Twitter and you're just kind of, checking the MMA world. It's been dead, man. It's never felt this way as long as I've done it before. It just feels like there's no pulse right now in MMA, and that has a lot to do with the UFC. So I think, with the way things are going, it's just really slowed down. And I think it's slowed down because it shows us that without a big star driving things are just going to be dead. That's just how it works. We've been fortunate enough to have, multiple stars at one time. And now there's no stars, really. I mean, if you look at it, nothing against the current crop, but there's no, Conor McGregor's our guy right now, and Conor's off doing something else. So, sites have to put up, Conor boxing news, or, Ronda's gone. So it's like, okay, what fills that gap? Well, good MMA fills that gap. Or where's good MMA been? Okay, so then now it's like, now we have Buffalo this week, and that's cool. But don't tell me. I know every fight fan out there, I know all of my friends in the media, you guys included, are looking at Dallas going, man, I wish 211 would get here. And that's 2 months away. So it's like, or a month away, So it's like, okay, well, we wanted to be there because look at that. There's Stipe, there's, Poirier, there's Edgar, there's all these names, Joanna. Okay, but then that's going to happen. And then what? It's a crazy time right now in MMA, man. And I've just never seen it like this.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Duane, because, it's a little bit down the road, but in your mind, how do you think International Fight Week will end up looking this year in July? It's almost certain that Conor won't be fighting on the July 8th card. Neither will Ronda. That leaves the potential return of John Jones, maybe Garbrandt versus Dillashaw in the co-main. What are you thinking here?
I think they got to make St. Pierre Bisping happen for anything. They got to have a big name on that 4th of July or that July 8th card, that International Fight Week card. But listen, like that scenario alone drives me nuts. Like I said, I've never seen certain things before. I've certainly never seen the UFC come out, announce a matchup without having a date, a signed contract, and an event to push. They came out and said, hey, Michael Bisping's fighting George St. Pierre next. And it's like those two guys start arguing 2 weeks after about who's going to sign the contract. It's like, this is crazy. Yeah. I've never fucking seen anything like this before. We're like, well, we want to get some eyes over here. So GSP's come back. Okay, GSP's come back. And then it's like, okay, he's got title shot. And then Romero, hey, you're screwed. Hey, Jacare, you're screwed. But then it's like, well, we don't know when they're fighting and there's no real date to push. That's just sloppy public relations, man. And I think that goes to show that, when you take out a guy like Dave Schaller left and you have a lot of that core group that left and you have guys that have nothing to do with the fight game take over, this is what you get.
I feel like Chael Sonnen, who always mentions the importance of a date, would have a lot to say about, the way this whole thing has come together. We're doing a press conference, and like you mentioned, there's no date to push, there's no event to push, and yet here we are, the plot thickens because obviously Michael Bisping is saying, hey, I don't want to wait till September or August like GSP mentioned on the MMA Hour, and he's saying, I'll fight Romero instead, which I mean, I'll ask you, are you buying it in the slightest? I mean, between Romero and GSP, obviously one of them makes you a lot more money, but what do you think? Obviously, the UFC is not going to scrap the GSP matchup, even though, you know, it's a silly predicament, but do you think that matchup really makes it on the July 8th card?
Yeah, you know, you said it right there. Chael Sonnen, you know, and he's good friends of ours at Flo.
Yeah.
Chael always preaches that you have to, you know, the date's the most important thing, and that's what you push, and that's what you make people remember, and that's when you lock up people's heads. This situation is crazy, man. And now, like you said, yeah, GSP saying, yeah, I'll fight Romero, and you know, Bisping's still saying, like, Bisping's still trying to goad GSP into this fight that they already, you know, pseudo announced. This is nuts, man. It's absolutely bonkers that we can't, you know, that there's no viable date for this, and there's nothing in, you know, I just mentioned 211, but there's nothing on, you know, on the radar after that, and that's what's crazy. So going back to Scott Coker, you know, Scott Coker said Friday night that, you know, which was, I was proud to see that he said confidently that this UFC or this Bellator NYC card is the best pay-per-view in MMA. And, you know, and he said, you know, I'm a fight fan. I buy the fights that are worthy, you know, kind of alluding to the fact that he watches UFC. And he said this is the best one of 2017. Whether somebody comes in and does another one that's great before the end of the year, sure, that's possible. But this is it. I think, you know, like 2017 won't be the year. I don't know if Bellator ever usurps the UFC as the top promotion, but they're certainly making ground. And it's important to note that they're making ground is because the UFC is asleep at the goddamn wheel.
And just circling back.
I mean, I'm not just. I'm like you know me, guys. I'm positive. I'm a positive cat, but it really feels like if you look at like the poster game and the way they're promoting this stuff, it feels like who's ever in charge of this is asleep at the wheel, which has been such a change from the Zuffa regime, who were so tight on that wheel for 20 years.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, especially as MMA media, it's something that we notice because it can be a little bit frustrating when things aren't promoted in the same way and fans aren't as excited about it and the buzz isn't there. You know, me and Casper, we're talking about it all the time. We have noticed, you know, obviously a decline in the cards and also, you know, some fights being put here and there which don't make as much sense as before when they're really focused on putting more logical fights and more logical cards. But I mean, look, it's a crazy time in the industry. Duane, I'm just wondering, with GSP, I mean, a long-time iconic boxing trainer, Freddie Roach, recently stated that out of the 3 fights on his deal, GSP is targeting Conor McGregor as the final one. What do you think about that order? Because originally we thought maybe he'd do Bisping, Conor, and that at the end of his career, he'd do the original weight class and retire as a welterweight champion again. What do you think the middle fight could be? And do you think we might still see him competing or trying to capture that welterweight belt?
To be honest with you, I don't see any of it happening. You know, and I'm an optimist, but I think for, you know, GSP's master plan to happen, that, you know, that takes Conor McGregor being involved. And I'm telling you guys, I got, you know, if Conor does pull out this boxing situation, you know, I think it's very unlikely we see him back in the UFC ever again. I mean, you know, the thing is, say if this Floyd thing plays out, maybe they fight in, you know, September or June or, you know, say 7 months from now. And then say whatever happens there, you know, Conor needs another year before he comes back. That puts the lightweight division on hold for 2 years, you know, and then that puts, you know, George St. Pierre out, you know, after if he fights Bisping this summer. You know, I just don't see it, man. I think he'll fight. I think the GSP Bisping fight will happen, and then I think Bisping will go back to welterweight and fight there, and then they'll maybe try to pull a super fight somewhere that I'm sure nobody's going to really be excited about because those days are gone. Now, what I love to see, I wish they'd come out. I wish they would have said, you know, forget about this Bisping thing and just gone with Conor McGregor from the jump. I mean, I just talked to Mousasi this weekend, and Mousasi said the same thing. Like, none of this makes sense. And, you know, if you look at the interview, Mousasi's pretty strong word. He said, you know, he blasted UFC decision-making, said they're fucking up my chances. You know, like, I'm here to get a title. I'm not a young man. I got a certain plan, and the UFC, by doing this, they've stopped the whole division, and it's just fucking up all my chances. So, you know, I think we got a hot Gegard coming into Buffalo, and I think that's going to be a great fight. But yeah, man, I like it when everything runs properly. I like when the divisions flow, when things move. I'm not about these big, like, showcase fights where it stops everything else, man. We got 500 fighters that are working. You know, quit making it about 8 of them and just keep it moving.
I love it. I love it. This is Duane Finley, hot and raw, dropping pipe bombs just the way we like it. And It's interesting because, towards the end of the last year, you kind of thought, all right, maybe, all right, WME, IMG, we got these growing pains. There's a change in the guard. They're doing things differently. They've obviously got a lot of money that they need to make based off of that $4.1 or $4.2 billion investment. We understand why they're going for these crazy money fights, but towards the end of the year, you kind of thought, all right, maybe things are going back to how they were originally. Then we get hit with GSP Bisping, which I'm not saying I hate the matchup. I don't mind it, but it certainly goes back to the, all right, maybe we are making these crazy fights that don't really make sense. I mean, it's a funny situation, and I guess if it doesn't happen, let's say Conor does disappear, like you mentioned, this is an interesting conspiracy theory. What else do you do with GSP? I mean, he's essentially, you got to think he's coming back with the idea that he's going to face Conor McGregor at some point, and if that gets pulled off the table, that's a hilarious twist. What is he really left with? I mean, does he just go back to welterweight? There's essentially no reason to go back to lightweight, is there?
Oh, no. I mean, yeah. I mean, if Conor's off the table, then this becomes a lot less appealing to George St. Pierre. I guarantee you that. George St. Pierre was happy. He was just fine. He's not in financial trouble. There's still a competitive itch, but he wants these big fights. But that's the question is, like this. Let's examine it. What kind of fights does he really want? I mean, do you really think George St. Pierre wants to fight Yoel Romero? Nobody wants to fight Yoel Romero. You know what I mean? So there's a reason for that. I think, Gegard Mousasi is the only guy who would willingly step up and do it, because if you think about it, he offered to fight Rumble Johnson. There's another guy nobody wants to fight. So, I think with George St. Pierre right now, it's all about business. And it's all about securing a legacy that I think he felt he left a little shaky the last couple fights. He wants to come back and prove his dominance, make some money, and get out, and make his run for greatest of all time. With Conor being the hot guy right now, think of it. It's like Eminem, right? I mean, anybody who pays attention to hip hop, right? Like Eminem had his run, and nobody could touch him, and then he goes away, and then he comes back, and in this era that he's gone, you have the Kanye West, you have Drake, you have Lil Wayne, these guys get like real hot, and they're the big thing for the time. Then they do collaboration tracks with Eminem, and Eminem kills him. Now, like, the thing that people be like, oh man, Eminem's just hopping on a track. No, that's not what he's doing. He's reestablishing his dominance by dominating these guys on their own music. So therefore, like, it still keeps his spot at the top. I mean, that's how this fight game's played. That's how hip hop's played. And I think a lot of people miss that. That's what George is trying to do. George is trying to get that hot guy right now. And that's Conor McGregor. And you take Conor McGregor off there, I don't think it's worth it to him. Oh my God, you guys got me like riled up. I'm dropping like Eminem references.
Oh, for sure. And Duane, as we let you go, before we find out what's coming up on FloCombat, got to give us your favorite Eminem album. Is it Slim Shady LP or Marshall Mathers?
Hell no, man. I think Eminem Show's the best. I think that's where he got into his. I think that's where he got into his groove, really, man. Like, if you look at like the first two before that, he's kind of chasing the beat a little bit, and his style's a little off. And then, Eminem Show, he gets right in there, and all the whole from top to bottom, that album's fire. And then, after he got sober, now he's just like going too fast, and I don't know, but like that's my Eminem jam. That's my go-to. As far as FloCombat, man, yeah, man, we got some good stuff right now. I mentioned the Mousasi interview. That's fire. That's up. There's a ton of good stuff in there. He talks about, Mousasi. I know you guys have interviewed him, but people don't realize, man, this dude is a straight savage when it comes to interviews. Like, if you look at the part of the interview where he talks about Weidman's mindset, he brings up a great point. He's like, this guy 2 years ago was calling out John Jones because he thought he was unbeatable. He's like, then, he's had his losses. He's like, the doubt's there. And now he knows defeat's right around the corner, we're with me. He's like, I'm like, oh my goodness, Gegard putting that smash down. But yeah, man, we have, see who we have coming up this week. We got Kelvin Gastelum, Aaron Pico, James Gallagher, Joe Schilling, a couple more I can't think off the top of my head, but they will definitely be there. So yeah, all good stuff coming your way for FloCombat.
Well, there you guys go. Make sure to check out FloCombat and follow Duane on Twitter at Duane Finley MMA. A lot of great classic content, lots of funny jokes. Make sure to follow along UFC 210 coverage. Should be a lot of fun as well. Duane, thank you so much for coming onto the program, dropping some pipe bombs and hanging out with the boys. It's much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Anytime, gentlemen. You can call me with 5 minutes notice, and I'm there. Just hit up the bat phone, and I'm there for you. I mean, it's crazy. I don't mean to sound angry because I'm not angry. It's just like I'm just kind of baffled by this, what we're dealing with right now, what we're seeing in MMA. I just don't like it.
Hey, this is Tony Okagui Ferguson, and you guys listen to Submission Radio. Keep tuning in, guys.
All right, guys. Our next guest is one of the most respected analysts in MMA. Other than his great work on MMA fighting, he's also the host of the Luke Thomas Show on Sirius XM Rush 93 Mondays through to Fridays. He also hosts two phenomenal podcasts, Monday Morning Analyst and his live chat Promotional Malpractice. And you can also catch him on the MMA Beat. The man is everywhere. He returns back to Submission Radio. Luke Thomas, it has been a while. Welcome back. How's it going today?
It's going quite well. Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, we really appreciate you, Luke. And before we get into it, we got to ask you, because this is something that we have to deal with every year. Did you get sucked in by any April Fool's breaking news or articles this year? Or are you impervious when it comes to April 1st shenanigans?
I've gotten pretty good at the bullshit meter on that one. So I saw a couple ones out there, but I was anticipating it. I even tweeted about it in the morning. I was like, April Fool's is the day where we celebrate fake news. That like lets you know what a terrible day it is. Yeah. But mercifully this year, no one caught me. But frankly, there weren't any really good ones. Google usually has some decent ones. This one they have like Google Wind or something. But in MMA, everyone was terrible with it. So no.
Yeah, and it's a pretty frustrating day for us as well, because obviously here in Australia we live in the future, and so we get two doses. We get the Australian one, and then we get all the American ones, which is where we go to all our news. Were there any articles that obviously none of them came close, but were there any that frustrated you when you saw that and you saw people buying into it on Facebook or social media, and you thought this is just bullshit? How can people believe this?
No, because again, they weren't good enough. The only time I get frustrated is if people begin to tweet me or email me being like, hey man, is this true? And I didn't get any of that this time. Everyone kind of basically realized what garbage it was. So mercifully this year, I can't complain, but there's always next year.
And of course, it's always funny seeing some of the more clickbaity websites going for the April Fool articles, and you just think, hey, this is kind of your websites all year round. So you sort of expected that it's always funny articles all year round where you click into it and it's just nothing that it says. So I've just been burned too many times before. Now, Luke, really appreciate you coming into this program. And I mean, we're a week out from UFC 210, a pay-per-view that some fans are kind of looking forward to. I just want to quickly get your gauge on it, your excitement level for this pay-per-view. I mean, speaking to a lot of media members this week, and I don't know, some are excited. We're sort of on the fence with this one. How do you feel about this card coming up?
It's the words you used to ask the question, I think, are really instructive here, because the word you asked was excited. Am I really excited? Not necessarily. I'm not down about it by any means. The main event is great and the co-main event is great. There's a couple other stars on that card, but I'm highly intrigued by it. And I think we use this word excited as like a catch-all for whether it's good or not. So here's what I mean. Like DC versus Cormier, we've seen it before. There's a chance it could go exactly the way as the first one went. Of course, we always know that MMA is crazy, but there's certainly that part of us that's like, how different is it going to be? Then the co-main event, you're like, well, Chris Weidman's a big guy. Gegard Mousasi is good, but this is where he always kinds of reaches his limit and then things fall apart. But to me, when you read below all the sort of surface level analysis, there's a lot going on, man. Like, we'll start with the co-main event. Chris Weidman, geez, two brutal stoppages in a row. The guy's filled with injuries. I mean, can you imagine if he loses 3 in a row as former champ? This is a very serious moment for him. He has categorically refused to ever take a tune-up fight. That's a major problem, or at least not a major problem, but something that we could identify as a major problem after the fact that things don't go his way. On the other hand, it's a great opportunity for redemption if he goes in there and blows the doors off Gegard Mousasi. Mousasi, however, could not be more confident, could not be more honest in public with his interviews. You guys know his last fight, he was just on fire at the post-fight press conference. This is the last fight on his contract for the UFC, and he is openly stating, he said it to me on Friday, I want to see money. I beat Dan Henderson, he makes more than me. I beat Vitor Belfort, he makes more than me. What is happening here? Excuse me. So that's a huge, huge co-main event. And then the main event, you guys know, light heavyweight is, starting to heat up again. You've got Gustafsson versus Teixeira coming up. Jimmy Manuwa just blowing the doors off people. Your guy down there in Australia, Tyson Pedro, an up-and-comer. Misha Serkinov just rejoined. Light heavyweight is going to make some interesting noise. At the top of that division, this could not be more important. Is there going to be Jones-Cormier too? Or is it going to be Johnson-Jones? Or what's going to happen? So to me, this is really interesting. And if Cormier loses this, then this is I wouldn't say it's terrible for his career, but he doesn't become what he wants to be. So I know it's a long answer to your question, and it won't change people's minds about, how excited am I? But when you think about all the important things that are happening here, it's a lot.
Well, first of all, that was a great answer. And second of all, why do they have Joe Rogan building up fights? They should have Luke Thomas talking about fights from time to time, because now I feel a lot more, I don't want to say it, but excited for this one, Luke. So thanks for that. And I want to stay on the middleweight fight for a second. There's a couple of things to talk about. The first one is what you mentioned in your great interview with Mousasi, where he did mention that he'll be a free agent. What are your feelings on this? Do you think is this a bit of a bluff from Mousasi? Do you think he'd actually consider going over to Bellator? Or do you think that with the way things are in the UFC and with the middleweight division being super, I guess blocked up at the moment with everything that's happening with GSP and Bisping, there's a real good chance we may see Mousasi sort of switch companies?
Yeah, that one's an interesting one. The part about Ryan Bader going over there made sense because he's a good wrestler and, he's not necessarily all that expensive, and UFC just never really got along with him, at least not at the end there. And, guys like Larkin used to work for him. So with Scott Coker, that one kind of made sense. Mousasi's in a similar position, right? He used to work in Strikeforce. That guys like that just have an ease with which they operate with Coker. So that always lingers in the back of your mind. But, if he loses, it's hard to say, because what will he ask? Can he really ask a lot? He might be affordable enough to retain. The question to me is if he wins. That's where it really gets interesting, because, they have told him he's explicitly he's hard to promote, or he's not as promotable as some other guys. Does that mean they don't want to pay him? Does that mean they feel like even if he's good, they have any responsibility to him, that they feel like meaningfully, can they even use him if that's the way they feel about him? So this is a really interesting one for me. I suspect that my hunch is that he'll stay in the UFC, but the level of discontent is real. It's not exaggerated. This is the guy who feels very frustrated. He told me he could beat Michael Bisping off the couch eating potatoes. That was his word. So I am highly intrigued by it. I don't expect to move, but I definitely can't rule one out.
I want to throw another sort of broad question at you about the main and the co-main event. Who do you or which fight do you think has more on the line? Because the way you describe it, there's so much at stake, especially for Mousasi, but also for Weidman as well. I mean, he's basically trying to stay in there as a top contender and a guy that people will believe as a future champion. Mousasi, he needs to sort of get over this bump like he hasn't in the past. And then you got Cormier, and I almost feel like, the light heavyweight division is so thin that any guy could sort of come back after a couple losses, maybe not so much in the middleweight division. Who do you think has more on the line in out of the main and the co-main?
Man, it's a lot on both, as you just pointed out. For the main event, Cormier has already achieved a lot, but the big thing for him is it ties in his entire athletic career, right? From being a wrestler in college to being a wrestler in the freestyle circuit to now in MMA, where you're always really, really good, but you didn't get that one win where everyone can go, okay, you're the guy right now, even though he had an incredible fight with Gustafsson, an incredible fight with Johnson, and those sorts of things. So that's lingering out there. Johnson has had ups and downs, but, the loss to Cormier already just lets you know, we know how powerful he is, but you always feel like he's got that Achilles heel. So to me, it's less of an issue for him. And then in the co-main event, as we talked about before, Gegard Mousasi has just always been that guy where he gets right up to the top of the division, and he doesn't look bad exactly, but he's just never sort of putting it together in a way where he can beat those guys like Jacare or whatever the case. This would be a huge statement, especially against a big American wrestler in the way that Chris Weidman is. So that would be kind of a really sort of statement win. Adding in this into his contract, it's big. The big one for me, though, of all four of the competitors, I mean, it would be bad for Cormier, but he could rebound, right? It'd be one loss, as you mentioned, who knows? Light heavyweight is so unpredictable. I think he could find himself in a title fight again. Man, for Weidman, that's the one I've really, really, really got my eye on. 3 losses in a row would be very bad. Coming off of 2 stoppages, it might push him to light heavyweight. He is not getting any younger. He is well past 30 at this point. And for me, Mousasi he's never been better. He is red hot right now. The guy's on a 5-fight win streak, something like that. Yeah. I mean, he is kicking ass right now, figuratively and literally. So that's the one. For me, if Weidman loses, that is a devastating loss.
And one of the things people don't really look at is Mousasi's fight record. I mean, the guy's been fighting for a really, really long time and has been able to go in that ring and really get a lot of experience in and find that best version of himself. This is a fight, Luke, where people aren't really sure where to hang their hat. I mean, both guys present a good case for possibly winning next weekend. When you're looking at this matchup, does one guy stand out to you as the winner when they get into that octagon?
No, they're all pretty competitive, right? I mean, I think a lot of people would say the very best version of Weidman shouldn't lose to the very best version of Mousasi. I think there might be some comfort in that one. It's just you don't, like, what version are you going to get? Now, to Weidman's credit, he looked great in those first couple of rounds against Romero. He wasn't making a lot of mistakes, and I thought he was well on his way to winning that fight, not by some huge margin, but comfortably enough anyway. He was tactical and thoughtful and that kind of thing. So they're all pretty competitive. This is the interesting part about it. Like, none of these guys have fatal weaknesses. I mean, you might say, well, what about Johnson's cardio? But even then, it's like the firewall of his punching power is so great that, you know, like Glover Teixeira's got great cardio. Who cares, right? Gustafson's got great cardio. Who cares? Like, it just didn't matter. To me, it's just a question of, you know, who's going to push this fight into later rounds. I think really that's the one that matters. And I know that the co-main event is only 3 rounds, but I mean, like, who is pressing the action in the middle and the later round of that fight? That'll really tell you a lot. But, like, dude, they're competitive. You got guys, you know, their stocks are up and their stocks are down, and they're meeting at times when ordinarily maybe they wouldn't be as interesting as they are, but they're more interesting now. It's even in the case of Cormier Johnson. Sure, Cormier has a win over him, but dude, he's been off for a while. He's frankly kind of old for a champion. Like, there's plenty of reason to think Johnson can beat him this time. He nearly knocked him out with that one punch the first time. So it's very, very competitive.
And while we're laying out the stakes and figuring out what everybody's fighting for, obviously the stakes are high with everybody, but, you know, in terms of sort of looking to, you know, what's in their immediate future, obviously you got GSP and Bisping, they're fighting for the middleweight title, but where does this sort of put the winner of Weidman and Mousasi? What else are they fighting for? Are they, you know, surely this can't be for a title shot.
I really don't know. You know, whenever you do these super fights, what if they back, you know, for example, Bisping's like, oh, well, the GSP fight has to happen in July or else. I mean, nobody buys this. I hope, right? So it could wind up being much later in the year as a consequence. You know, you guys have seen it, like Conor McGregor going up to lightweight was really cool and really interesting, but it just created a ton of problems. And so I don't know. You would think they'd be fighting for a title shot, at least in Mousasi's case maybe, but it's just, I would love to give you a better answer about clarity. I just feel like it's so unpredictable.
Yeah.
Would a statement win over Weidman potentially, and especially if Mousasi gets on there and says, I want a title shot, could that lead to it? I mean, sure, this is an obvious thing. But even Mousasi said, I don't even know what it's going to get me. For Mousasi, what this represents is, number one, a chance to renegotiate his contract, of course, on better terms. But two, he thinks this is a chance to silence the doubters about his wrestling. Right, he's still sort of living with the ghosts of the King Mo fight. He's looking to put that behind him.
Let's talk about the main event again. And I mean, you've touched on this throughout the interview, but from Anthony Johnson's perspective, I mean, a lot of fans don't really know much about Johnson's camps. He's not that vocal. They may not follow him as much in the media. Tell us, how much improvement do you think he can make from the last fight to this one? And what's the pivotal thing that he needs to focus on in this fight to beat Daniel Cormier? Do you think it's a fact of catching Cormier with strikes, or do you think he advanced enough in his wrestling that he stays away from that situation where he gets taken down and possibly ends up in trouble again with DC on his back or on top of him?
Yeah, it's separation. I've talked a lot about this in my career. A lot of guys are really good at stopping shots. They're not good at stopping shots and creating separation. Now, what's interesting is typically Anthony Johnson is good at that. He just wasn't good at that in the first Cormier fight, where you can stop a guy's shot and immediately break, either from a clinch, stiff arm, whatever the case, you know, limp leg out of it. There's all different 1,000 ways you can do that. But if he gets pressed against the fence, if you see Cormier driving underhooks on him, you know, Cain Velasquez to Junior Dos Santos, right, similar kind of thing, then it's a big problem for him. So to the extent that Johnson can operate at distance, any kind of distance, really, even uppercut distance, he's going to be just fine. It's the problem for him is that when Cormier latches onto a neck, or more specifically gets that underhook, that's when all the problems begin. So can he make better adjustments and do those kinds of things? It seems within reach. It seems like it's something he should be able to do, but we'll have to find out on Saturday.
And I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit here. And, you know, if DC does lose, there's a lot of theories out there that John Jones versus DC would still be the fight to make because of the rivalry there. But, you know, a lot of people are sort of counting out Anthony Johnson in a possible fight with John Jones. To you, is it likely that Johnson could pose a threat and beat John Jones, or do you think it's still a clear win for John Jones if he's, you know, at the level that we've seen him at when he returns to the UFC?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think at the level we've seen him at, I don't think anybody can beat him in that division. But couple things to note. Number one, sometimes he is a little too willing to accept big punches. We've all seen it when he puts his hands on a guy and there's a little bit of space between them. Got a lot of guys like Lever Teixeira, in fact. They'll drive uppercuts. They'll bop his head back. And, to Jones's credit, he's got a good chin, but I don't care how good your chin is. One of those from Anthony Johnson, and you're in big, big trouble if you're not already out. So there's something to be said for that. And two, man, look, what about all this time off? Like, he came back at 197 and didn't look awesome against Ovince St. Preux, and that's not the end of the world, but I don't know what he's going to look like. I mean, he's been training this whole time, and yes, a late opponent switch does really affect the guy's ability to compete at a level at which you might be accustomed to seeing other things. So for me, it's a real big question. Like, we keep thinking there's going to be no cost to this time off because in the course of John's career, there's never been a cost to anything. I mean, even all the commission issues and the legal issues and the drinking and the not training, and he still goes in there and blows the doors off of guys. Can he still keep doing that at this stage in his career with this kind of time off? You just got to figure at some point that would catch up to him in some way, or maybe not. Or maybe there is no justice if you're one of his opponents or something like that. But to me, I think it's a really big question. I've said this. It's the same thing for Weidman in this fight. Why did you take this Mousasi fight? I don't know why he wouldn't want to take a tune-up fight. Now, maybe his team didn't even think about it. Maybe the UFC wouldn't consider it. Well, then, okay, you got to take what you got to take. But these guys coming off these layoffs, these guys coming off these devastating losses, they don't ever want to get their feet beneath them. They just want to get right back at the top again. And you saw with Rafael dos Anjos, he lost to Eddie Alvarez. He said, I'm going to get right back on the horse. I'm going to fight Tony Ferguson. How'd that work out for you? That moved you up a division and you lost. There's something to be said for getting the ground under you from stopping to shake and then try and go and make another run,
I think until you pointed it out, Luke, I never realized that for the longest time, the only Jon Jones performance we've seen is against OSP. So that's some interesting food for thought. And I love the line about in Jon Jones's career, there's never been a cost to anything. That's some serious food for thought. But for now, it's been a lot of fun, Luke. Guys, don't forget to follow him on Twitter at SBN Luke Thomas. A lot of fun things there. Of course, check out his show's Monday Morning Analyst and Promotional Malpractice, the live chat where you can ask Luke a bunch of questions, and of course, the Luke Thomas Show on Sirius XM Rush 93, and that is Monday through to Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. A lot of fun with you, Luke, as always. We'll have to get you back on the show soon. Till then, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Take care, guys.
This is Don Fry, and you're listening to Submission Radio. You touch that dial and I'll kill you.
All right, guys, and that right there was Luke Thomas. Hopefully, you are still enjoying the show as we come around to the final part where Dennis and myself will be giving a couple of spicy predictions on the UFC 210 main and co-main event. Hopefully, help out a couple of people who are betting at the moment, and hopefully we don't bankrupt you guys. So do not bet the house on anything that we say. But let's kick it off, man. I mean, this is a spicy card. We're going to talk about Chris Weidman versus Gegard Mousasi. A lot has been said on this episode already, but what do you think? If you had to give a prediction, Dennis, in this, what essentially is a close matchup, who are you leaning towards? What are you expecting this weekend?
Well, look, if I'm someone who's betting money on cards, I'd probably take a break this week because to me, the co-main event and the main event are razor close and any guy could win it. I mean, okay, so for me, between Chris Weidman and Gegard Mousasi and DC and Anthony Johnson, the bigger puzzle to solve is this Weidman-Mousasi fight because I really feel like it could go either way. To me, the only big thing that stands out about the matchup is Chris Weidman's wrestling. Now, I know Mousasi is a good all-around grappler with really, really good submissions, but when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Weidman's just an absolute beast, but the wrestling is what really gives him an upper hand here in this matchup for me. I think standing-wise, I'm not sure who exactly would have the upper hand, but I think Weidman will be able to, at some point, take Mousasi down and start working his game. Again, I mean, we've heard it over and over on this program. Mousasi is possibly the best incarnation of himself after 49 fights in his career. He's had a lot of experience. This could be the Mousasi that's ready to take the big stage and beat Weidman. But to me, I see Weidman using his wrestling, getting Mousasi down into some difficult positions, trying to use that ground and pound, getting some good positions, and using that leverage, possibly even stopping him towards the end of the fight. But again, the guy is on a skid, a two-fight skid. Who knows where he's going to be mentally? Who knows how his body's going to be? We know he's dealt with a lot of injuries in the past. But to me, for some reason, the difference in the wrestling is what's going to give it to him in this fight. But would you bet a house on it? I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
Well, maybe like a small house. Maybe like a small crappy house that you wouldn't mind losing. Like in Wolf of Wall Street when they call up and they're pretending they're from some big office and it cuts to like a shack somewhere in a meadow where like a goat runs out, just like, there's a creaky door. Maybe you'd bet that house, like a porta potty. You know, that's a bold prediction. I think you did well considering it's such a tough fight to pick. And I think you presented a couple of good X factors. I think one of them being Chris Weidman's mental game and mental state in general. I mean, he was an undefeated guy for a very, very long time. Everybody was massively huge on Chris Weidman, and rightfully so. You know, he beat a lot of legends. He was the champion. And as Luke Thomas mentioned before, though, like, just a couple of small little changes, and he wins his last couple of fights. So I don't know if you can really knock that much as far as his performances, but I just wonder how that's affected him and the way he looks at his career, because there really is, he is clinging on here. I don't want to say clinging on because it sounds disrespectful, but what he's fighting for is essentially to remind everybody that he is relevant in the division, and not just relevant, that he can be a champion. It's not enough to just be relevant. You need to be known as a guy that, yes, he can be a future champion. Mousasi kind of the same thing. Mousasi's, you know, always struggled against this final hurdle, and this would be, I would say, probably by far the biggest win of his career. So I think in this fight, you know, Mousasi, you mentioned the striking. I think Mousasi is technically the better striker. He's also faster. Very, very good striker. Weidman, though's got really, really good timing and very decent KO power. I think the other question is, other than just the wrestling, will Weidman choose to stand with him, or will he choose to use that wrestling? Because when he was on the program, I know you asked the question, you kind of made it sound like, obviously, he's got the wrestling advantage, but he wasn't, not that he wasn't buying it, but he kind of said, well, I've got the advantage everywhere. I outstruck a guy like Machida, who Mousasi couldn't outstrike, so I've got the advantages everywhere. So I'm very curious whether he goes for the, you know, the low-hanging fruit and looks to take the fight down, or whether he wants to sort of test himself and keep the fight on the feet. We know Mousasi is content to take whichever path will get him the win. He's content to stay on the outside and jab for 3 rounds, keep a very sort of calm, slow pace. So Chris is going to have to really break through that kickboxing range. He can't stay on the outside. He's got to get in on the inside and, you know, really make him work, and hopefully put his back against the cage. I just look at it and say, look, if he could take down Yoel Romero, and he had a lot of success in that fight, I think he'll be able to take down Gegard Mousasi, and I really think that's the difference maker. And Chael Sonnen recently said how, you know, immediately after the Tito fight, it all came back to him, and he sort of remembered everything. And I think, you know, Chris looked good in that Yoel Romero fight, and I think that if, you know, he needed to get back in there, shake off the cobwebs, and I think people are underestimating Chris. I think that we're going to see a much better version of him this time. I think a lot of the things that went wrong in the Romero fight will go right for him, and I don't know if he stops Mousasi, but my bold prediction is that he wins via decision. So that's the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's going to be very fascinating. To me, I'm interested because when we did speak to Chris, it didn't sound like he underestimated Mousasi, but I hope he knows what he's getting himself into when he's getting into that ring with him, because this is a guy with a lot of experience in fighting, 49 previous fights. This is a very dangerous competitor. And with Mousasi, I'm hoping he's not lazy and doesn't let Weidman take him down, because we've seen him very relaxed in the past, a little bit too relaxed sometimes. He's going to make sure to, you know, not let Weidman get into those positions where he may end up on him for a whole round and cause some damage. He's got to be very, very careful and know where his strengths are at, and not overestimate his grappling abilities against Weidman. Stay away from that position. Like you mentioned, Cass, stand up there, keep that jab going, use your striking, but, you know, don't just let Weidman take the fight where he wants to take it.
Let's talk about Rumble versus Cormier, because I'll sort of intro this one. I like this fight. It's a fun fight. You know, there's a lot of interesting things. Obviously, in the first fight, Rumble had, you know, like a month preparation, barely. Now we're seeing full camp Rumble. I think that's going to be, you know, a fairly big difference. I will say, though, as far as what they're fighting for, obviously it's the belt. But I feel comfortable knowing that the stakes, I kind of feel like, aren't that high in this fight. I know we spoke about it earlier on the program with John Morgan and Luke Thomas. They both gave great takes on what is at stake in terms of Daniel Cormier's legacy. And I think that's a big one. But in terms of their divisional standings, look, let's be honest. The division is so thin at the moment. If DC loses, you could easily see him, you know, getting back in there in 1 or 2 fights, or welcoming John Jones back. And if Rumble wins, well, then he's got an automatic trilogy going here. So I think while it's a fun fight, you know, I think the stakes are both high and not so high at the same time, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Look, when I'm looking at this, if I'm DC, I really want that money fight with John Jones in July. And if the UFC, like John Morgan sort of suggested, said, look, win or lose, we'll likely still give you that fight. The pressure is off me a little bit. But if I'm thinking, look, I still want that huge payday against John Jones in July, I got a little bit of pressure at my back. Also, what kind of training did he have? I think John Morgan brought up a good point. If Cain Velasquez was in there, are you as sure that you're as prepared for this fight as you were last time? Who are you doing all your drilling with? I mean, Luke Rockhold has that knee injury. He's traveling around. Cain Velasquez, we heard that he's doing up an Airbnb, so he's not in training as much. I know that DC is someone that,
Airbnb.
I know that.
I love it. I will say, I will throw this out there really quickly. There was a photo of Daniel Cormier on Instagram, and I think he has a six-pack now. I think unless my eyes deceive me, he's looking like GQ Daniel Cormier these days, I think.
GQ Daniel. I mean, look, the six-pack could do something in this fight, but my question is, look, we spoke to Javier Mendez, who said that for guys like DC, they like to get fight ready by going in there and having wars in the gym. That's how they feel. So if you don't have someone to push you to that preparation level, do you have doubt in your preparation when you're going into the fight? Let's not forget also, I mean, he is a little bit older. That has to be at the back of his head, the fact that he's getting a bit older. And with age, you do get a bit slower. The body doesn't feel the same. He has been focusing a lot on his broadcasting duties. So does he have that confidence in his preparation? I wonder how that's going to affect him. He's an Olympian, though. So Olympians are, usually very, very mentally tough. We see it in Dan Kelly. We see it in a lot of guys who compete that have been in the Olympics. But Anthony Johnson, this is the big question mark for me as well. How has his preparation been going into this? Who has he been working with to get ready for this fight? What's his game plan going to be when he gets in there? I mean, I know he doesn't want to get taken down by Daniel Cormier, but how much improvement has he made from the last time? So I don't know. It's going to be interesting because to me, I can definitely see Anthony Johnson knocking out DC and stopping him. I mean, those punches are just dynamite, but it's just so hard to get to a level of wrestling where you can stop a guy like DC from taking you down. I mean, it really does take a pedigree of wrestling from a very young age and just training relentlessly all through your career. I know that Johnson, is a pretty handy wrestler himself, but not at the elite level, not at the Olympic level. And to me, it's just hard not to see DC eventually get Johnson down and do something similar to what he did last time. The question to me here is, will he get caught before he takes Johnson down? The feeling here for me is that he won't. He'll take Johnson down and possibly submit him again. But I'm interested to see how Johnson reacts in that situation, because if he's learned from his last fight, we might see a more relaxed Johnson doing what he needs to do to get out of that position and possibly getting back up and then presenting DC with a puzzle of what do I do now that I can't keep Johnson down. I wonder if that's what's going to happen. But to me, DC's going to win this. What about you, Cass?
Yeah, good points. I watched the fight just the other night, and one thing I noticed, Rumble's biggest mistake in the first fight was overcommitting when he thought DC was hurt. DC recovered shockingly quickly. I think it shocked everybody, including Rumble, and and basically tied Rumble up when Rumble would throw a massive shot and miss. So it's almost like he was his own undoing. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was looking to end the fight quickly because he only had 3 weeks to prepare, so he knew he wasn't going to win a 5-round decision. He had no choice essentially but to finish, and I think some of that pressure is off him now, where as long as his cardio's there, he feels like, well, he can potentially win a decision. He doesn't have only one option in this fight, and that's to finish the fight. I think we'll see a more patient, confident Rumble this time. The problem, though, is DC's like glue. I mean, he finds any opportunity to tie you up in the clinch and put you against the fence. He worked perfectly against Rumble last time, and it really, really slowed him down. You can have great cardio, but when you've got an Olympian on you, just sapping your energy, it just takes so much. So I think Rumble, I guess one path to victory will be to stick and move, but that's not really his style. Throw a couple of punches, move back, create that distance. Rumble likes to come forward and really apply the pressure, and I think if he moves backwards, his knockout power won't be as much, but I guess for a guy like Rumble, he's still got a lot of knockout power, but if he does move backwards, he'll eventually hit the cage, and, that's exactly where DC wants him. The other tough thing about this, there are a lot of X factors, but there isn't really much data on either guy since the first fight. Even though it was a couple of years ago, what's really happened? Cormier had a war with Gustafsson, and then a ride-off against Anderson Silva. There's not really much you can say about the Anderson Silva fight. He's also had a lot of injuries and a lot of time off. What can you say about Rumble? Well, he made quick work of Manoa, Bader, and Glover. But what did we really learn from those fights? What, that he has KO power? We already knew that, but the bigger questions still remain, and they're going to be answered in this fight, such as how is his ground game? Has his takedown defense improved? Those are the two biggest ones. And I think that we all know he's been training with Neil Melanson. He says that it's kind of revolutionized things for him, but I think that despite training with Neil since that loss, I don't think, like you mentioned, Dennis, I don't think Rumble will really be able to catch up to Cormier's years of elite wrestling and grappling. I think that Rumble was in panic mode last time on the ground, and his sort of poor technique made him gas a little bit quicker. I expect him to last longer this time, but even if he does last, I don't see him necessarily dominating Cormier on the ground. So those really are the biggest questions. How has Rumble's takedown defense improved, and how is DC's chin after the war with Gus generally getting older, and how is his body in general after all the injuries? And the great point that you made, his training partners. Javier Mendez said that he, of all people, is a guy that likes to spar more. So I'm curious what kind of DC we're looking at, but I think regardless, it's going to play out very similar to last time. I think it's going to happen probably a lot longer, and I think it's going to be a bit of a late stoppage, maybe the 4th or 5th round. I think in some way DC stops him on the ground, whether it's a submission or just a TKO. So that's my official prediction.
And just lastly on the fight, I mean, you mentioned it perfectly. We've seen Johnson absolutely dominate since that loss, but will that be a negative for him? Does he go in there with too much confidence and not really focusing on what he needs to focus on? Because for Johnson, in my opinion, to really bounce back from a loss like that, you go in there with Neil, and Neil takes you down and he puts you in those bad positions, and you just get used to being in there with a more dominant grappler, doing what he's doing to you and staying calm, not freaking out, not giving up, doing the right things, and having to really, I suppose, I mean, I guess it's an ego thing, having to go back there, finding the people that will absolutely destroy you in those positions, putting those people on top of you, and just getting used to being in those positions. Because once you have DC on top of you, you have to stay calm. You can't give up. You have to do absolutely everything right. And even if he's preparing everything that he needs to stop DC from taking him down, he needs to be comfortable in the position that he may end up in a shit place with DC on his back or DC mounted on top of him. And he's got to stay calm, and he's got to be able to work his game to get out of there. So if that's the kind of preparation he went through, then sure. But then if he's riding on this high from knocking out 3 dudes back to back and thinking, hey, I'm invincible, then that could be a big problem for him.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that in a lot of ways, this preview show that we're literally about to put a bow on, it's been cathartic, and it's actually gotten me more excited for the event than I previously was. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to drop your comments in the comment section below if you're checking it out on YouTube, and let us know who you think is winning. Is it Gegard? Is it Gegard? Is it Mousasi? Is it Gegard? Is it Weidman? Is it DC? Is it Rumble? Are you making any bets? If so, I'm curious how much the punters are putting down. If you're making any bets, let us know how much money you're putting down. I know some of our listeners, shout out to Mark Fellows, who's always hitting us up with how much money he's winning, and we're sitting there secretly jealous, like we're starving here, Mark. We can't even feed our families, and you're rolling in the dough with all your sweet bets. So let us know, help out Submission Radio, because we got bills to pay. But that's it. That's another show. Congratulations to Ibrahim Halimi for winning the John Kavanagh experience that is going to be this Friday. We can't wait. We're super excited. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to meet all of you guys there, and obviously hang out with John Kavanagh. Thank you to all our guests this week. Thank you to Duane Finley from FloCombat. Thank you to Luke Thomas from, well, pretty much everything these days. Obviously his channel, MMA Fighting and Sirius XM. And, of course, the wonderful, always lovely to have on the program, John Morgan of MMA Junkie. We couldn't have done it without those guys. Hopefully if you've enjoyed the show. We'll be back next week, similar time frame. It's going to be much to the delight of those people who miss our weekend slots. A new episode won't be this Wednesday. It's going to be right after UFC 210. We're going to be doing a breakdown special, pretty light on the guests, just journalists on there to break a few things down, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So till then, enjoy the fights and stay safe.